We are live on YouTube, youtube.com/ at the Hokie Hangover Podcast. Virginia Tech 31, Marshall 14. First recap for win of the year, right? First victory pod for us, Ricky,
Yes.
on this endeavor tonight. It's just going to be you and I, as far as I know. We talked to Andrew. He's got a prior commitment. He said if he gets home in time, he would try to join late, but he didn't want to hold us up. So here we are. It's just you and I. How's it going?
Going pretty well. I was informed this weekend by a certain friend of the pod that I needed a background for the podcast rather than the wall that's behind me in my fiance's Peloton. So, what better image than a tugboat, considering Bashal Tutin showed up to the press conference after this game wearing a chain just with the letters tugboat on it, which was pretty hilarious. Chain was approximately the size of my face, which is absolutely bananas, but couldn't come up with a better one.
NIL is a fantastic vehicle that we use these days. That's what
and
I would say.
now that I've played the joke, I'm gonna get rid of this background because I'm going in and out and it looks sloppy. So
There you go.
I just
You
wanted
look
to
good.
start with the joke of having.
You look good now.
Yeah,
You look good now. All right. I mean, this game had a little something for everybody, Rick. You know, it had the slow start and
that's one way to put it.
it had the slow start on offense again, and it had something for the pessimists, right? And the second half, it had 3 consecutive touchdown drives for the optimists. Virginia Tech has now put together 2 really, really good second halves in the first 2 games, right? So,
Yeah,
A plus on the halftime adjustments. The start of this game offensively was not great. I mean, we're just going to get right into it. 31-14 Virginia Tech. Talent won out here. I think it's pretty fair to say. Marshall's pretty bad, but you know, Virginia Tech figured it out and got the win. Great. We're in the win column. Let's talk about it, right? Because I don't think a lot of people came away from this win incredibly satisfied. I mean, Virginia Tech nearly covered the spread. I think Virginia Tech, honestly, with the way it played in the second half, could have covered the spread. Like, they were pretty
not
damn
if you
close.
ask Scott. Scott was very adamant that this was not going to happen.
Yes, he was. That's correct. He said that, you know, should have known, right?
Yeah, should've known.
But I mean, the first half, I mean, the offense really kind of sputtered once again out of the gate, and we'll get into the defensive side of the ball because there was a ton of good on defense, like a lot of really good stuff. But the offense once again got off to a really slow start. This is obviously the second game in a row that this has happened. Again, small sample size, right? But there's a little bit of a trend, right? Virginia Tech struggling to run the ball early in football games, or just simply going away from the run, right? You know, it seems like Kyron Drones is not too comfortable in the pocket, at least in the first half of these first 2 games, and it seems like he settles in once the run game starts to pick up, and he comes out at halftime and plays a lot better. I mean, where do we want to start here? I think the slow start is just top of mind here.
Yeah, it you know, and it's frustrating because I think it's become pretty clear that based on these first 2 games, the defenses that Virginia Tech has played are not.
Oh boy. We lose Ricky?
They weren't the ones that were creating the stops. Marshall was kind of just giving Virginia Tech whatever they wanted to take, and it seemed like Virginia Tech did a really poor job in the first half of taking what Marshall was giving them. We talked about it, you know, during the game on X and whatnot, but Tech just got away from the run game way too much. They got way too cute, and that's why you had a team that was 1 of 9 on third down in the first half, and the only offensive points in this game were a field goal, considering Jalen Lane had a punt return for a touchdown.
Right. The first handful of drives are really, really frustrating. Virginia Tech turns the ball over, not turns the ball over, but turns it over on downs first possession, right?
Mhm.
Goes for it, does not get it. They then punted on, I believe it was their next four possessions. My computer is freezing up on me, so we're off to a really hot start.
Yeah,
Look, slow start to the game, slow start to the podcast here, but it was consecutive. It was
the
three or
drive
four
chart was
straight.
not as entertaining as the Duke Northwestern drive chart that you and Joey highlighted on the Basketball Conference podcast. Which, if you're listening to this and you do not listen to BC, you need to go do that. But you're correct. Tech had the turnover on downs, which I was kind of hoping they would have kicked the field goal there. I was a little
Yeah,
miffed with that decision.
Brett.
Um, Four straight punts, field goal, punt, punt, half. So
Yeah,
that is your first half drive chart in this game, and it was kind of indicative of Virginia Tech just never getting into a rhythm. And then whenever they would put themselves in third and short situations, it seemed like they got away from the traditional run game. And when you've got an offensive line that, at least through the first two games, has done what I think is a relatively poor job of pass blocking, it seems like you should take those running situations when you get them. Take
right.
advantage of them when you have them. It seems pretty clear to me that this offensive line is much more comfortable in the run game. It seems like Kyron is much more comfortable when Virginia Tech is able to lean on the run game. And that showed, especially in the second half. As far as the first half goes, it seems like the general consensus is that Virginia Tech just got way too cute on offense. And rather than pressing their advantage where they had it, they kind of, played with their food a little bit. And when you've got a team like this that's coming off of a loss when they were, two touchdown favorites, and then they go into this game where they were three touchdown favorites, just do the simple stuff, man. Stop
Yeah,
fooling around and do what's working.
yeah. Virginia Tech had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm not going to count the 8-yard play to end the half. So I mean, there were 8 real first half drives. This game played out a lot differently, right? Because if you think back to the Vanderbilt game a week ago, I'd have to go back and check. I'm not sure Virginia Tech had 10 possessions in regulation a week ago. I'd have to go
Yeah,
back and even look at it. Virginia Tech had 8 in the first half. A lot of that has to do with the defense, right? But Virginia Tech,
yeah.
getting off the field was just much improved, much improved. But I mean, Virginia Tech had a bunch of punts here in the first half. They had 6 punts, a turnover on downs, and then a field goal. Not great. Like,
No,
obviously not
and
great.
yeah, and I felt like the thing that was holding them back the most was their inability to block consistently. I mean,
Yeah.
every other play, Kyron was running for his life. He was constantly having to escape the pocket, constantly trying to extend the play. Um, had a couple risky attempts to throw it away when he was, in the process of being sacked. One of which he got penalized for the intentional grounding. But
Yeah.
the it, I think it is also important to note that there were also some coverage sacks in this game and some coverage pressures where Virginia Tech, whether it be by scheme or just not beating their guys man to man, were not getting open. And one credit has to be given to Kyron there for not forcing it, but
Right.
also this is a receiving core that Virginia Tech should not have these issues with against a Marshall secondary. You
Yeah.
would hope that this unit would be able to kind of create whatever they wanted as far as being open downfield. And as long as they got the time to get the ball there, this shouldn't really be an issue. But it seemed like in the first half, whenever Tech was trying to push the ball downfield, guys were just not open, or Kyron was having to escape within a second, 2 seconds from the pocket.
Virginia Tech, this is courtesy of GameOnPaper.com. Virginia Tech averaged only 4.83 yards per play on Saturday. That was in the 23rd percentile in all the games that were played in week 2. Obviously not great. Now, it was even worse when you consider how bad the first half
Yeah, I
was
was going to say I would like to know what that number is
and how great
exclusively for the first half,
yeah, and
if
how
you
great the
if you
second
can
half
pull that,
was. Yeah, let me see. I'll work on that.
because they
But
were. I mean, they were pretty efficient in the second half, and we can go ahead and transition to that if you want, while you're
Yeah,
looking that up, because
yeah,
it was clear from the outset of the second half that either Brent Pry or Tyler Bowen had had enough of fooling around, and they ran the ball 11 out of 12 plays. I think the first 6 or 7 were all runs, uh, and immediately punched it in after a solid like 6.5 minute drive. That was the kind of statement drive I think that everyone in the stadium needed to see, for Virginia Tech to finally start to take control of this game and impose their will on a team that was kind of fighting their own demons on both sides of the ball.
agree. I'm struggling to pull this up right now, but the I mean, I think the general consensus is like Virginia Tech struggles offensively were really apparent early on. Things were obviously a lot better in the second half. I think the way you described it a minute ago is Virginia Tech being a little too cute in the first half. I think trying to force it felt like, and I know you were in the press box, Andrew was in attendance, and I'm watching on television, right? So there's kind of three different vantage points. But it seemed to me watching this game on TV like they were just kind of forcing the pass game a little bit in the first
Yeah.
half, right? I mean, Bashal Tutin, I tweeted this out. Bashal Tutin was averaging 7 yards per carry in the first half,
Hmm.
and they just kind of went away from him, you
Yeah.
know? And this was a problem that we highlighted during the Vanderbilt game. I know the Vanderbilt game played out a little differently because Virginia Tech got into a hole early, and then it was a lot of passing situations, right? So, like, naturally, you're going to get away from the run game when you fall down by 3 scores. But Virginia Tech was in a situation in week one where Bashal Tutin didn't touch the ball a bunch, and some of that was game script related, but we knew that that needed to change in week two. They got him the ball early in this game and then just kind of went away from it, and they were really forcing the passing game. It just wasn't there. Second half, they really hammered the run game,
Hmm.
and it really put them in an advantageous situation. And thinking back to last year, you know, Virginia Tech was at their best when they were running the football, right?
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
and you know, we talk about the 8 drives in the first half. It was a lot of punts on both sides, right? Virginia Tech's defense, which we'll get into in a second, played very well in this game. But it was a lot of punts, a lot of like struggling, both teams struggling to sustain drives. Second half of this game, I mean, Virginia Tech had a 12-play, 50-yard drive. That was the first touchdown drive of the second half. After forcing Marshall to go 3-and-out to start the half, right? 12 plays, 50 yards, capped off by the Bashal Tutin touchdown run. Marshall comes back and scores, right, which wasn't great, but then Virginia Tech just embarks on another 6-play, 65-yard touchdown run. The game ended on the very next drive when Marshall threw that interception and Virginia Tech went down and scored again. That's when
Yeah.
the game ended, right? Just a really good job by Virginia Tech of putting this game away, stepping on Marshall's throat defensively, and gave up a lot of yards in the second half, right? But really, I think in totality, got the stops when they needed to, got off the field, and the offense stayed on the field, sustained drives, and a lot of that had to do with the running game setting up the passing game, which, again, passing game was better in the second half. Pass blocking was better in the second half, but I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that Virginia Tech wasn't in a lot of third and long situations in the second half, man. Like, a lot of
Mike, do you
teams
know how
that have good
many
offensive lines are going to struggle with that.
do you know how many pass attempts Kyron Drones had in the second half?
I'm looking at the drive chart. I can count them, but you have that number, so why don't you tell me? 4.
4. He went 4 for 4. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just from covering this team now, it's pretty clear that when this team doesn't have to rely on Kyron to have to move the ball almost by himself with 30 plus pass attempts, this offense is much more efficient. And that's not necessarily a knock on Kyron, although he's got plenty to work on in his own game. But this offense has always been more efficient when they can run the football effectively. And it takes so much pressure off of Kyron, who is still developing in his own right and has, like I said, plenty of things to work on just individually. But for an offensive line that has kind of been as suspect as they have been against the pass rush, it seems like this is going to have to be the way moving forward. You're
Yeah.
going to have to find a way to do this. And it's also surprising, Mike, that Bashal Tutin's 22 carries in this game, I think, are his second highest total ever at Virginia Tech, which, as far as I'm concerned, is not very good considering
Right.
he's been extremely effective throughout his tenure here in Blacksburg now in his 1+ seasons. And for an offense that has been as reliant on the run as they have been over the last 2 years, you would hope that Virginia Tech is going to try and get him involved earlier and more often, and make sure that they commit to the run in the second half. Because even if they have to bring in Malachi Thomas for a good number of carries, which they did in this game and found lots of success,
He looked good. Yeah.
yeah, he did. I think that that's going to have to be the way moving forward, and that's kind of the kind of central point of my column, which will be coming out tomorrow morning. But this is the blueprint. This is how Virginia Tech is going to move the ball and score. They're going to have to be methodical, commit to the run game, take shots downfield. Don't rely on Kyron to have to move the ball from play to play to play. Let him take those shots once you've gotten those defenses to kind of come upfield. And I think defenses are obviously going to adjust to this, and they're going to force Virginia Tech to push the ball with Kyron more often. But until then, you've got to do what you're good at, and it seems like this is Virginia Tech's calling right now.
And I just don't think simply there are a lot of teams on Virginia Tech's schedule that are going to be able to force Tech to throw the ball with Kyron Drones. Like, there's only a handful of teams that I think, based on what I've seen so far through a couple, and again, we're 2 weeks into college football season. Some of the ACC teams played in week 0. But, like, based on what I've seen so far, there are not that many teams out there that are going to be able to say, hey, Virginia Tech, we're going to load the box and actually stop you. And Kyron Drones is going to have to throw the ball now, which is good news for Tech, right? The recipe, I think, is pretty clear. When Virginia Tech was playing their best football last year, both Kyron Drones and Bashal Tutin ran the ball a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's obvious we don't want Kyron Drones running the ball more than he needs to, because they got to keep Drones on the field.
Yep.
We've touched on that. There's hammered that home a million times. Bashal Tutin, 22 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown. Malachi Thomas, you mentioned, who was very good in this game when he came in, 9 carries, 52 yards. And we've seen this out of Malachi Thomas before, obviously. His freshman year, he exploded onto the scene, had several 100-plus yard rushing games. He's more than capable, right? If you have to spell Bashal Tutin with Malachi Thomas, he is more than willing to do that, and he will be able to do that. And to your point, I think Virginia Tech needs to be running the ball 65% of the time offensively, at least, right? And I think keep Kyron Drones' passing attempts under 25 a game, I think, would be a pretty good recipe, and we'll just kind of see how that pans out. And Kyron Drones is 14-21 in this game, right? He did complete 2/3 of his passes, but it was a struggle to keep him upright, because when Virginia Tech is in obvious passing situations, 3rd and medium, 3rd and long, it's really, really hard for this offense to pick up first downs, right? Number one, Tyler Bowen is not that comfortable pushing the ball down the field in obvious passing downs, because he knows the offensive line can't block. Like, the offensive line, when defenses know that a pass is coming, right? Virginia Tech's offensive line is not good enough, has not proven to be good enough to keep Kyron Drones upright in 3rd and medium and 3rd and long passing situations, point blank, period. That's why the play calling is what it is, right? Bowen's getting killed. That's why, though.
And to add to that, I think the other part of it, too, is Kyron is still working on that in his game.
Right.
I think a lot of us had hoped that there would be more projection for Kyron this year, in the sense that he would have developed a lot of that this offseason. And unfortunately, he's just not there yet. He's still growing as a passer and learning how to process what defenses are showing him. So you're combining that with the fact that the offensive line is still trying to figure things out from a pass pro perspective. So 3rd and 6, 3rd and 8, those are the situations that are really going to kill this team. And I think that that's going to be kind of the key point for Tyler Bowen moving forward, trying to find a way to avoid those situations. And the best way to do it is to commit to the run game early and often.
Yeah, and social media explodes, right? When it's 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, or we're running a draw or a screen pass. But
Or it's 3rd and 1 and you're running a bubble screen,
and
or
that's
you're
justified.
trying to throw it downfield.
The third and short's justified. But when Tech's getting in third and long situations and this offensive line can't protect, right? And you see a lot of teams in college football have issues on third and medium, third and long situations, picking up first downs and keeping drives alive. But especially when you have a Virginia Tech offensive line that is just not great, right? It's not great in pass pro. And when they send 5 or 6 and it's an obvious passing down, they cannot keep drones upright. They simply can't. That's why the play calling has been so conservative in those situations. I understand it. Virginia Tech's been behind the sticks a bunch this year so far, especially in the first halves of these games. It's
Yeah.
something that they have to improve upon moving forward. But you're on your side of the field and you're in third and medium, third and long, and you mentioned receivers were struggling to get open, which is a whole different issue that they got to figure out. Bowen's got to either scheme them open or they just have to simply play better and get themselves open.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole different thing. But I think Virginia Tech staying ahead of the chains, and it seems very cliche and very easy to say, but it's pretty obvious that's the recipe. Like when this team runs the ball well, they put
Yeah.
themselves in a really advantageous position, and when they go away from the run and they try to force the passing game and try to put something in front of them that's not there offensively, they really struggle. And we've seen that in the first halves of these games. The second halves of these games, they've committed to the run, right? They committed to the run in the Vanderbilt game. They ran the ball better in the second half and opened up the passing game. We saw the same thing yesterday. You mentioned only 4 passing attempts for drones in the second half. 2 of them were chunk plays. One was a 20-yard pass to Jalen Lane. That was a huge play. And then one was obviously that bomb that drones threw to Stephen Gosnell. Unbelievable catch, right?
Yeah.
So Tech, those chunk plays open up, and we saw the chunk plays in the passing game the second half of last year, right, from late September onward, from that Pittsburgh game moving forward. Tech was able to pick up those chunk plays in the passing game, and a lot of it had to do with the run opening it up. This is the same recipe. It's the same group of players, right? This is kind of what it is. So it's a little discouraging that Virginia Tech's offensive coaching staff has gone with such a pass-heavy approach, understanding that the run game it's pretty apparent the running game is what is the bread and butter of this offense. It's the strongest part of this team. I think for Virginia Tech fans, the reason why a lot of Hokies fans are getting so frustrated with the offensive play calling is because Virginia Tech finally has a running game that, when it's rolling, is pretty consistent, right? Like Tech hadn't had a running game that was really consistent throughout the Justin Fuente era or the end of the Frank Beamer tenure. It had been years, right? Short of that Khalil Herbert season, it had been a really long time since Virginia Tech had any sort of run game. I mean, we're talking like 2011 with David Wilson. It had been a while, right? Outside of that Herbert season. So now that Tech's got a consistent run game with Tootin that developed last year, I think fans just want to see more of that. And I think it's pretty apparent that when they commit to that, there's a lot of success.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of fans not seeing the development that they thought they might see from year 2 to year 3, but also it is seem like there's just been too many instances of Virginia Tech abandoning their strengths, which have been since last season running the ball, play action, shots downfield. That's going to be the way that Virginia Tech moves the ball moving forward, I think. And if they can find ways to stick to that formula, I think they're going to have a lot more success and they'll be able to get off to better starts because, as it turns out, the defense was able to rebound from the Vanderbilt week. And, Marshall's got plenty of issues on the offensive side of the ball, and I think they were on full display in this one. But Virginia Tech's defense is obviously going to face tougher competition down the road, but
Yeah.
this was certainly a good sign for them, kind of locking up Marshall from almost start to finish.
Yeah, I mean, defensively, the secondary was awesome. Like, first of all, we gave Mansour Delane his fair share of criticism after game 1. It was deserved. He didn't play very well. He was outstanding on Saturday.
Yeah.
Gave up like 1 reception, and it was a ridiculous catch. and it was
Yeah,
perfectly defended. I mean,
a
what are you
a
going to do?
one-handed catch in which the guy it was essentially catching it 2 feet above his head.
It was perfect
Uh,
coverage. I mean, what are you
yeah.
going to do?
Hmm.
So, I mean, Delane was really good. Dante Lovett, I understand he came in kind of in the second half when Tech was a couple scores ahead. We saw a lot of Lovett, really encouraging stuff there.
Yeah.
Most Phillips, I thought played really well.
Hmm.
I thought both
Jalen
safeties
Jones.
played well. Jalen
Yeah.
Jones played great. That's
Really,
two
it
good
was.
Jalen Jones games, by the way. Two in a row
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. I mean, there was a point early on where you were a bit worried because Dorian got hit for one,
Yeah,
and you're thinking to yourself, "Damn it! If they're going to be able to to pick on Mansour and Dorian Strong, this is going to be a problem."
yeah,
But really, after that one, it seemed like Tech locked them up from the start. I mean, I think there were a lot of mentions on social media about the 12 pass breakups in this game, which
yeah,
is, I think, an ungodly amount in this era of football where there are so many easy completions that offenses are taking.
yeah.
Uh, Stone Earl 13 of 36 in this
Awful.
game,
Yeah,
which Mike, I know he's not in the ACC, but this would have been a good volume shooter award
yeah,
winner.
yeah.
I mean,
13 completions for 131 yards. Yeah,
yeah, not the greatest effort. And Marshall really had that one big play. I think it was AJ Turner that broke it off for like 50 some yards.
yeah.
And
69. Nice on the final total there.
yeah,
Yeah.
outside of that, Marshall did not sustain almost anything. And
No.
again, I know it's Marshall. I know that they're in the transitioning to more of a air raid, spread it around, throw it around offense, but this was the kind of rebound performance that you really needed to see in this one. After against Vanderbilt, they really struggled both against the pass and the run, giving up big plays downfield and constantly having issues tackling and filling gaps. It seemed like that was really not as much of an issue today.
Yeah, the 12 pass breakups. Kelly Lawson had three of them. I thought
Hmm.
I mean, he was all over the field. He had a really good game. You
Yeah.
mentioned Mose Phillips. I mean, really, you go down the list. I mean, Delane had a couple. Dante Lovett had that diving, that one that he kind of dove across and got his arm in there. It was an incredible play. Caleb Spencer got in the game
Yep.
and looked
That was
pretty decent.
encouraging. Yeah.
So really encouraging signs and strides forward for Virginia Tech's defense. Obviously, grain of salt that it's Marshall, but I
Hmm.
think after seeing what we saw against Vanderbilt a week ago, where again, Vanderbilt took some strides, but Pavia just like gutted this defense last week,
Yeah.
and for Virginia Tech to bounce back like this again, a little bit different quarterback, right? And I think it's pretty clear this Virginia Tech defense is not going to struggle as much with guys who don't have that like above average to elite scrambling ability.
Yeah.
And Stone Earl doesn't present that. So Virginia Tech was able to not really worry about that extra hat in the running game, and I think that really helped them.
Were you surprised that Marshall stuck with Earl for the entire game?
I mean, a little bit. I mean, we were coming in wondering what they were going to do at quarterback. They
We didn't even know who was
rotated,
going to start, let alone if they would stick with one guy.
right, and I mean they rotated. I mean, Chad Pennington's kid got in late in Marshall's opener, but I mean they rotated two quarterbacks that entire game, and
Hmm.
then Pennington got in late when it was a blowout. So we knew there was a pretty good chance we'd see two quarterbacks in this game, and they really didn't. And with the way Stone Earl struggled, I was surprised that they didn't move away from him. I don't know if there was an injury or what. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
the fact they didn't move away from Earl, either they're committing to him moving forward, and that's why they just stuck with him, or maybe they just weren't prepared to, from a personnel standpoint, from a injury report standpoint, to throw anybody else in there. I don't know what it was, but just some really encouraging signs defensively, pass rush, linebackers, etc.
Yeah, and the other part of that makes this so encouraging was that it seemed like in the second half, a lot of these breakups were coming in man-to-man situations.
Yeah,
If you can play blanket coverage and man-to-man, that really changes everything you can do on defense. If you don't have to sit back in zone and kind of try and keep things in front of you, if you can take some chances, That's going to really open up this pass rush for Virginia Tech. And again, it's against Marshall, so take it with a grain of salt, like you said. But it's all about building that confidence, building towards the end goal. And this was certainly a step in the right direction.
One thing we haven't mentioned yet, Jalen Lane totally flipped the momentum of the first half. The punt return.
He's electric. That's for damn sure.
He is. Yeah, he is. I mean, Virginia Tech needed that so desperately. Like, offensively, just really couldn't get anything going.
Well, if he didn't return that, they would have trailed going into halftime.
Yeah, I mean, they would have gone to halftime. I mean, we mentioned the first half drive chart offensively was really, really ugly. I mean, 8 possessions, you came away with a field goal.
I mean, Lane Stadium was pretty quiet at halftime. Imagine what it would have been like had Virginia Tech gone into the locker room down 4 to Marshall.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't great. I was a little nervous, and I don't know how obvious it was in the press conference, but I was a little nervous when I saw the penalty flags flying. And I don't know if it was like immediately obvious in the press box that the penalties were going to be on Marshall, but on TV, Tom Brenneman, famed Tom Brenneman, was calling the game on the CW. Welcome back.
Welcome back, Mr. Brenneman.
Welcome back. Swinging a drive. He was real. He was real unsure, and
I think a lot of us were. It was not obvious to me in the box when that happened. I was not sure who that was getting called on.
I mean, they were saying in the booth, they're like, well, this could be coming back because like that's the only thing you're supposed to say when you see flags on a kick return, right? You're like, yeah, it might be coming back. But then like the officials were all kind of gathering in a circle, and like none of the flags were in the area of holding, so they were real confused on the broadcast. They were like, not sure. Let's see what this is. And then it was a couple of that random one, like sideline warning and something else. Can't even remember. Face
there
mask,
it is. Scott in the YouTube comments. Deep drive to the left.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to be put on this headset again.
Turns out he is on the CW.
Hey,
here he is.
It's the CW. The magic of the CW.
That is.
Or as it, what did you guys call it yesterday?
We call it the Cheeks. We call it the Cheeks W because they never have any good games on there. I think it's a fitting name for it.
It certainly seems like it.
Yeah. A couple other things. So that was a really good aspect of special teams. There was also just some weird coverage stuff, some bad penalties.
No double zeros.
No double zeros. That part was good. Virginia Tech had 8 penalties in this game for 58 yards. I want to keep that to a minimum.
They've got 13 penalties so far this year. I checked it while we were in the middle of recording, and this is not the team that is going to be able to overcome lots of flags.
Correct.
They need to stay ahead of schedule. They need to get off the field when they earn it. If they're giving away free possessions and free first downs, and if they're putting themselves in big holes on first and second down, this team's really going to struggle. And going into a place like Norfolk, which it seems like all the bad stuff happens whenever this team travels to my area code, that's the kind of stuff that cannot happen next week. Like you gotta lock it up. To another BC reference, I'm just rattling them off tonight.
Rattling them off. Yeah.
You gotta lock in. You gotta play with composure. You cannot you can't beat yourself. And Virginia Tech, that's going to be the mantra really for the rest of the season. Virginia Tech's not going to be able to overcome stuff like that.
I was having a phone conversation this afternoon. Shout out Johnny. I was having a phone conversation this afternoon, and I think the general consensus of the fan base, like on social media, considering the slow starts and how the offensive line has looked and how the team has kind of looked, it's been very up and down. I think we can say the best way to describe this team is uneven over the first 2 games, right? It's been essentially 4 quarters of good football, 4 quarters of mediocre to bad football, and then overtime's overtime. It's choose your own adventure. I I don't just kind of looking at the rest of the schedule. There were some games where I had circled where I didn't necessarily have the warm and fuzzies in terms of the offensive line and just the general outlook against some of the teams on the schedule, right? That was before the year when I thought this offensive line would look a lot better than it has so far.
Yeah.
And Old Dominion, we'll preview the Old Dominion game later this week and get into the Monarchs. Old Dominion's not one of those teams where I'm like, all right, Virginia Tech's gonna have a really hard time up front. But in 2 weeks against Rutgers, that's one that I have been hammering home since the offseason that I have been pretty concerned about.
Yeah.
And if Virginia Tech's going to play defense like it did yesterday, then I feel okay about that aspect of the matchup. But I don't feel great about Virginia Tech being able to block Rutgers. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but like the Miami game obviously worries me. Ricky, I don't know if you saw Clemson last night, but
yeah. So I think I mentioned this. I may have mentioned it to you guys or to one of my other friends, but we talked a lot about how this schedule was very gettable for Virginia Tech. And thanks to some uneven performances from the Hokies and some moderately impressive performances or very impressive performances from other teams, this schedule is looking less and less gettable by the day.
Yeah.
The Rutgers game, Mike, you're right. You've been hammering that home for a while now. That's not going to be a cakewalk by any stretch. The Miami-Stanford road stretch, I mean, we all know what Miami's done so far, even though they haven't. Last week they didn't play anybody, really. They were just playing themselves. But
right.
At Stanford is not going to be something to overlook.
Well coached.
Even you, noted Thomas Castellanos hater, can appreciate that BC is going to be at least a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, ranked Boston College.
Yeah, Georgia Tech, even though they lost yesterday to Syracuse, they're certainly not going to be anyone to mess around with. Syracuse is immediately after that. So
well, I don't want to. I don't want to cut you off, but that Syracuse Georgia Tech stretch, like they played each other yesterday. Syracuse got the better of Georgia Tech. They were up by 17. On my ACC pod, I mentioned we had a whole discussion about those look like two of like the top half teams in the ACC. Yeah, I didn't come away thinking like Georgia Tech wasn't any good. I came away thinking Syracuse played really well. Georgia Tech fought to get back in it, but like those two games back to back, like you just mentioned, that's a tough stretch there.
Yeah, for sure. And then you've got, I mean, obviously Clemson, which took Appy State out to the woodshed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to say the least.
Duke may not be able to score unless it's busting your over in overtime. But their defense is certainly nothing to trifle with. And then obviously the Fighting Calandrias with the Mickey Mouse staff in Charlottesville are somehow 2-0. So this schedule all of a sudden is starting to look like there's going to be lots of tests down the road. And that's partially because Virginia Tech does not seem to be as good as we thought they were coming into the season. But there are teams in the ACC that happen to be on Virginia Tech's schedule that are playing better than expected. And that's going to present a lot of problems for the Hokies as they try and work out some of these issues that they've been having.
Yeah, like teams on the schedule that don't have the talent necessarily that Virginia Tech has are playing better than expected, and Virginia Tech that has a bunch of talent, we believe, has been underperforming, right? Yeah. So that's a bad recipe. And I mentioned Syracuse and Georgia Tech. I don't think those are two teams that are necessarily lacking in talent. Syracuse has a lot of offensive talent that's very good. Defense looks improved. Georgia Tech had a rough go of it defensively yesterday, and I think a lot of it was because of what Syracuse was doing. But like Georgia Tech is not short on talent on offense or on defense. A lot of the defensive players that remain on that Georgia Tech team were guys that Jeff Collins recruited, and Jeff Collins' issue wasn't recruiting. right? Before
Yeah.
he left Georgia Tech, he was recruiting
He,
fine.
he didn't figure out the coaching part
He
of
didn't
being
figure out
a coach.
the coaching part, right? He didn't figure that part out. So, those two teams are talented. We know Miami and Clemson are talented, right? That Clemson Georgia game, with the way Clemson looked last night, that's starting to say more about Georgia than it is about Clemson, because
Yeah.
Clemson was hanging there
I
for a
mean, I
while
don't
and then
know
got
what
boat raced.
I don't really know what Appy State has this year in terms of talent, but when you hit the over by yourself
Yeah.
in the
Well,
first half or something
and
like that,
so they set a program record for points scored in a half, and they set that with like 7 or 8 minutes to go in the first half.
just nuts.
Cade Klubnik, who I think anybody who has paid attention to Clemson's issues offensively over the last couple of years, Cade Klubnik has been much of the reason for that, right? And his inability to consistently complete passes down the field. He was 11 of 11 at the end of the first quarter, 11 of 11 for 234 yards and 3 touchdowns, and he also had a rushing touchdown. He had 4 touchdowns by himself in the first quarter. It was a boat race, and the offensive side of the ball is not even the part like I think about when it comes to the Clemson matchup. It's Clemson's defensive front against Virginia Tech's offensive line, which is not something I'm looking forward to watching. That
Did you see Parker Clements almost had his second sack of the season?
Look, I will say this too, and I meant to bring this up a few minutes ago. I know Parker Clements is a bit of an internet meme, right?
Yeah,
Virginia Tech
yeah.
Twitter. I know he's been not playing particularly great in pass protection, especially. The running game, he's been okay. Pass protection, not great. We're all aware of that, and he's become a bit of an internet meme. The one thing I will say, and I don't know if this is in defense of Parker Clements as much as it is just like a statement of the rest of the on the rest of the Virginia Tech offensive line. The rest of the line hasn't looked particularly good either, right?
Oh no.
The Parker Clements stuff is a little bit it's low hanging fruit, right?
Yeah, he is the poster child for what's been an underperforming offensive line so far.
Right.
And when you sack your own quarterback in the season opener, I feel like that's kind of it comes with the territory. You open yourself up to that.
People are going to disagree with me on social media on this, because this is just like the rallying cry of Virginia Tech Twitter is to just shit on Parker Clements. But the one thing I will say is that I don't think there's necessarily a large gap between the play of Parker Clements and the play of the rest of the offensive line, is all I'm going to say. Like, it's been pretty mid across the board.
Well, I mean, Lath Ganem was benched for part of this game for Bob Schick, which I found discouraging for sure.
Tells you everything you need to know. We're basically back to the offensive line we had last year, right?
Well, I mean, to Ganem's credit, he did come back in, later in the game, but he was, just chilling on the sideline there, and kind of, I think it was midway through the second when I noticed, and was, healthy, not being tended to by the trainers or anything. Like I said, came back in later in the game, but left guard still being worked out, obviously. I think Xavier Chaplin was called for 2 holdings against Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. That's not going to cut it. Oh man, the the Hokies rock comment there.
I'll bring it up.
This is a unit that desperately needs to gel and figure some stuff out. And I want to be fair, because I think a lot of it is them. It is pretty good. But I do think part of it is probably Kyron, in the sense that he's holding onto the ball a little bit. Prime mentioned this in the post-game presser.
Yeah.
But also, I'm not sure he's doing the best job calling out the protections. And I don't know how that process is going. So I'm open to sharing some of the blame here, but the offensive line, as far as the pass protection goes, certainly needs to tighten it up.
Yeah, agree. And we'll see if it does. And I think a lot of it hinges on just simply running the ball better, because if they're not going to make improvements in an off season and carry the momentum from the last 3 months of the year a year ago to where we are now, I think it's pretty safe to say that this is going to be very reliant on what Virginia Tech does in the running game. And like I mentioned, I think the good news for Virginia Tech is a lot of the teams on the schedule are going to have trouble stopping the run. There are a few that will not, right? Or a few games where I think Virginia Tech's just going to have to do a really good job running the football against really good defensive competition.
Mm-hmm.
Rutgers, Miami, Clemson are the three. Georgia Tech's rushing defense, not fantastic. We'll see if it looks a little bit different later in the year. First year defensive coordinator, all that stuff going on, right? New DC. Syracuse gave up like 260 something yards to Ohio a week ago. They looked a little bit better against Georgia Tech's rushing attack yesterday, but like that's a work in progress, right? So that's another tough-ish game on the schedule. You can run on Stanford, and I think you're going to have to cross-country trip.
Yeah.
So there are games out there. Virginia can't stop the run. Calandria throws it all over the yard, but like they can't stop the run. So I mean, you're going to be able to run it there. Duke setting football back a million years. I don't know. We'll see.
Go ahead and throw up this comment from Andrew on, and because this is something we mentioned on the last pod, is that
I think it's a good question too.
This unit's had a lot of snaps together now, and I know that they're still relatively young. I mean, Chaplin, especially Ganem, the Moore brothers, they're not, fifth and sixth year players. But I am a little disappointed in the sense that they have not gelled all that better. And, it's hard to place blame, but I feel like this always goes back to whoever the coach of that unit is, because it's ultimately your responsibility to figure this stuff out. And I think a lot of folks, I mean, we were so excited when Joe Rudolph came, right? I mean, we thought that was going to usher in a new era of Virginia Tech offensive line play, kind of following the progress that Vance Weiss had created.
Right.
Which, in my opinion, Vance Weiss is probably the best assistant coach Justin Fuente had. If you go back and look at his track record.
Absolutely.
And obviously that did not materialize in year one. So Ron Crook comes in year two. We didn't see a ton of growth last year from this group. We haven't seen any growth so far this season.
Yeah.
So, I mean, every guy in that room, players and coaches, they all own this. It's hard to put it at the feet of any one person, but it's a lot easier to hold a coach accountable because ultimately this is your unit and you're the one running the show.
I am more inclined to think that this is personnel based, Ricky. Here's why. We weren't complaining about Ron Crook second half of last year, were we?
No, not that much.
I am understanding, and I get the viewpoint of, okay, last year went really well. Why isn't the offensive line blocking this year after how well the end of last year went? And I think it's a fair question. Yeah. But also, like, what's more realistic or to you? Like, what do you think's more likely, Ricky? Do you think it's more likely in the offseason that Crook forgot how to coach, or do you think it's more likely that a bunch of 3-star offensive linemen that don't have a ton of starts under their belt, like you just mentioned, don't have a ton. Caden Moore's been here a while, Clemens has been here a while, but like Braylon Moore, semi-new, Ganem obviously brand new, Xavier Chaplin, pretty new to left tackle, right? Like he was banged up a year ago. I think it's more likely that these offensive linemen are simply just not playing very consistent football. I think that's more likely. But that doesn't mean that Crook can't get more out of him or can't coach better. I think that's two things can be true at the same time, obviously. But I think this is personnel based. I think it starts in recruiting. I don't think Virginia Tech under Fuente, or obviously under Fuente didn't do a good enough job recruiting, but under Pry so far, for all the skill talent Virginia Tech has acquired on the recruiting trail, and Pry and his staff have done a really, really good job recruiting Virginia and done a fantastic job with the skilled position talent, especially on offense. They haven't recruited offensive line well. And we're only in year 3, right? And he's still stacking recruiting classes on the offensive line. But they simply just got to add more talent to the room, right? I mean, the fan base is screaming about Parker Clements.
Yeah.
But, like, a couple things. Number one, the staff doesn't feel like there's anybody good enough at offensive tackle that they've recruited or developed, right? And that's a whole separate discussion, and that kind of speaks to what I'm saying from a personnel standpoint. Number two, it's really hard to portal offensive linemen. I've mentioned that. Like, really, really hard to do that.
I mean, there was a lot of hope that Montavious Cunningham will be able to solve some of these issues. And he hasn't even seen the field yet that I'm aware of.
Right. Not playing. He's not playing. So they missed there, or they don't think he's good enough to play right now. So yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously
case, Virginia Tech is now 0 for 2 on transfer linemen in the last 2 years. Because if we remember, Clayton Frady was brought in, and I don't believe he saw the field either last year.
Do you remember I went on that tangent? I forget when it was, an early season podcast when I was screaming about the offensive line, and I was like, they didn't portal any linemen, and somebody tweeted at us or messaged us or something and said, "Oh, Clayton Frady." I'm like, "Oh, sorry, he hasn't seen the field yet." That tells you everything you need to know. Sorry, my point stands, right? Like, it's hard. Like it's hard to portal linemen, and I just think they got to do a better job recruiting lines. Like, the depth on the line is just not there on the offensive side of the ball.
I mean, my thoughts on recruiting is I really don't pay attention until signing day, given how things are going. But even if you just look at the last several classes, I mean, Tech has done a better job of recruiting in the state, but if you just go by the recruiting rankings, things haven't really gotten all that better.
Right.
The vibes are there, right? Like everyone likes that. Brent Pry gets it, all this fun stuff. But according to the people that do this professionally, now you can argue whether or not the rankings are biased, and I think there's probably some fair evidence that they are. But Virginia Tech is not really making a ton of headway in that area, and that is especially true on the offensive line. Absolutely.
Yeah. Virginia Tech staff's done a great job of mending relationships in the state of Virginia at the high school level. Indisputable.
Yeah.
Indisputable, right? With the way things were left, and we've talked about it a million times. Indisputable. They've done a great job building relationships with the high school, with the high schools again that were just non-existent under Fuente. They're starting to pull those players. Fantastic. It's still a bunch of 3 stars. The rankings don't look all that different.
You can only do. I mean, like, yeah, this program was built on the back of 3-star recruits. That's absolutely true. But if your aspirations are higher, right, especially in this era where guys don't stay for 3 or 4 years anymore all that often.
Yeah.
It is incredibly important to get guys and develop them quickly. And, I was really encouraged by Laith Ganem getting the start week 1. I thought that was a huge deal. The fact that he was able to come in with no experience, beat those guys out in camp, I thought that was a really good sign.
Yeah.
That hasn't panned out. And
he'll get better. He'll get better, hopefully, right?
Yeah,
play more snaps,
but that kind of goes to the other guys around him. I think we're stuck saying the same thing about them in the sense that, we're hoping they're going to continue to get better and grow. But the unit as a whole just hasn't gotten there yet, and it's definitely what's holding this team back right now, I think.
Agree. The depth needs to get better on the offensive line. It starts with recruiting. Virginia Tech fans have expectations of this team being something that they were, 15, 20 years ago in a time in college football that was a lot different than it is right now. And Virginia Tech is still, for all the good that the staff's done and turning things around, and they've got some solid momentum in Virginia and all that good stuff. They're still not recruiting at a level that matches the expectations that the fans have. Like they're just not, right? I mean, Virginia Tech fans are expecting this team to compete for ACC titles, but Miami and Clemson are posting top 10 national recruiting classes every year, and Virginia Tech is 20, 25 spots below them every year. So you either have to be elite at developing, right, or you just have to get better on the trail. And the answer, by the way, is both, because you can be an elite developmental program all you want, but then when you get into those games against Miami and Clemson consistently year over year, talent is going to win out, right? Talent is simply going to win out.
So,
And
yeah, and I didn't really mean to dredge up a recruiting conversation here, but if you pull up the current rankings for 25, which is this upcoming class, which again, I know very little about because I've stopped paying attention to recruiting until they actually sign.
yeah,
Um, Teams that are ahead of Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, SMU, Duke, Stanford, Pitt, and Syracuse. Those are all programs that Virginia Tech should be outclassing in this area.
and almost every single one is on the schedule
Now,
this year, by the way.
yeah, now it is important to note, right, because you have to take these all with a grain of salt. Virginia Tech has 16 commits at the moment. A lot of these other schools have more, which that's important to note because that affects the rankings. But um, that's where you got to be in a conference that's got 62 teams now. You're going to have to find a way to be in that top tier, and no one is expecting Virginia Tech to recruit with Clemson and Miami and Florida State. It's just
Right,
not going to happen.
right.
But Syracuse, Georgia Tech, Stanford, SMU. I mean, I guess I can kind of see SMU because, man, that oil money it's
They're in
money and all right.
Texas. They're in a major metroplex with a lot of really good football in Texas,
Yeah.
with a lot of money behind them. Yeah, I don't know. It was just worth mentioning. The broader point is, I think that it goes back to the initial question, which we answered, I guess, 20 minutes ago now at this point. But it's the personnel and the coaching. I think a lot of times people just want to hammer Ron Crook. It's kind of like a scapegoat situation. Like you could stick anybody there. I mean, fans were screaming at Joe Rudolph in year one, but it's really hard. I mean, people are asking for a gourmet sandwich with shit toppings. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, hey, I'll take a standard turkey and cheese if I can get it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the way to get to that point is just run the football, just run the damn
Yeah.
ball,
I
man,
mean,
just run the damn
it's
ball.
it's clear this offensive line can do something well, which is run block.
Yeah,
That they seem to be competent in that area. So let them do it.
yeah, just let them do it. That's where we're at. That's all I got. Virginia Tech wins 31-14 against Marshall. ODU awaits. We'll preview that game later this week with the full crew. Andrew will be back, and yeah, we'll probably do that live. I'll put out a
I would hope so.
yeah, we'll put out a message about that on social media so you all know when we go live. Thanks to everybody who listened live tonight, jumped on YouTube, on social media. What do you got, Rick?
I wanted to say before we left, shout out to Bill Roth. Got to hang out with him for a little bit before this game started. Was glad to catch up with him.
Goat.
Nels Williams with ESPN Blacksburg. Got to talk with him for a little bit. It was nice to meet him. Wanted to give him a shout out. Also, the biggest shout out of them all goes to Clark and Izzy Ruland for giving me a place to stay. Got to hang out with them at their tailgate. Saw some cool folks before the game started. So one of the cool parts about going to Blacksburg is that anytime you're there, there's folks around that you know, and there's some really good folks there that are, let's just say, very influential in the area, and they're very, very caring and awesome, and very, very glad to be able to hang out with them and spend some time with them every fall.
One of them you saw was Dr. Jeremy Counts, sponsor this podcast,
Who,
Counts Family
in fact,
Pharmacy.
did not replace Mike McDaniel this
No,
week.
I am here. Surprise. I am here. You can't get
Mike
rid of me
was
that
the
easily.
only Hokie Hangover member not in Blacksburg I'm aware of.
In a shocking development.
Yeah.
I was not there. Shout out Counts Family Pharmacy, Home Field Apparel, Vivid Seats. Shout out Jeremy. Shout out Clark and Izzy and all the listeners who joined us live tonight. Podcast will be posted on audio tomorrow morning, Monday morning. If you are listening to this, you didn't listen live. You're listening to the audio. Fantastic. If you all want to listen to this again, you can. It'll be out tomorrow on audio. Make sure to subscribe and like the YouTube channel. We are really trying to get that going. We've seen some great growth already. We want to continue that. We want our audio numbers to essentially match YouTube, right? Or I guess vice versa. We want YouTube numbers to match what we put out on audio every week. So we've built a really strong following on audio. We're really proud of the growth we've had over the last few seasons, especially. We want that to continue on YouTube. It would really, really help us out to do some stuff that we want to do. So please go like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It takes literally 30 seconds. Just please go ahead and do that. That would be really helpful to us. Ricky,
Absolutely.
Anything else?
Nope. Rate, review, subscribe, standard. And like Mike said, we'll see you later in the week to preview the pesky, plucky, annoying, frustrating. Any other adjectives you got for ODU?
I thought you were talking about Virginia Tech. All right, cool. See you later this week. Go Hokies.